Who do we have? We have my speakers off.
Hello, James.
Hello. Okay, how are you folks? Well, that's not very welcoming.
Yeah, so far so good. What about you?
We're okay. Hi, I see we have Jesse Eisenberger on. Hi, Jesse. Thank you for coming. And hello, Dimitri. And we are gathered here today, as Eric Erway might put it, in an unusual room. We typically have a different one, so I will use that to explain my personal tardiness. Everyone else was right on time. Let's do a couple of introductions. Do you guys want to share your video but not audio?
We can do that.
Just make sure that your audio is muted, but your video is not, and your speaker is turned off. Otherwise, we'll get echo. And we do this because we used to have Zoom. We don't anymore, but all the computers still think we do. All right, I'm going to share my screen with the Zen Hub.
So, James, let me interrupt you. It will be nice if you activate recording of this session, just to
Thank
share
you. Good
with
reminder.
everyone.
Now, typically these recordings are automated, but not this time. Let me go ahead and do that. Is it recording?
Yeah, see the little,
This is a recording has started. Does it?
but
Let's
I
see.
don't know. I didn't hear
Well, I'm going to make sure. Dimitri, I believe that recording has started because with BlueJeans, you configure a meeting to record as you are configuring the meeting and not during it. But I will try to make 100% sure through this UI, okay?
Okay, I just see a blinking red light in the top left corner.
It's the universal sign for recording. We've all seen television. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Ihor, who is a liaison here from Community Engineering, which, is that correct?
That is completely
I
correct.
said Max's guy, that's what that means.
Exactly.
Igor, is your video on?
My video's on.
Okay, let's look at Igor. Hello. So, community engineering is obviously a team of longstanding, and they run a lot of community projects, up to and including MSI and even GraphQL now, and other really large and important parts of the Magento ecosystem. But up until now, our team has run without direct community engineering engagement, just because we are a different program, a different suite of software, and the rules of engagement that community engineering has set up are very heavily adapted to Magento and Magento extension type of software dev cycles. So now we're getting into this, and this is going to be huge. So thank you very much for coming. I don't know if anybody else here needs to be introduced to Mr. Andrew Wilcox, who has attended now a couple of these, but just in case you haven't seen him, this is Andrew Wilcox. He is a product manager. Product, I said. That was a cool pronunciation I just did. He is a product manager who will be taking over increasingly the vision and the focus for PWA Studio, and we are super excited about that. Normally, Eric Erway would be here, and he will continue to come to later ones. He's not going anywhere, but today he has conflict. We also have James Kalkman for Docs and Sami Ashok for UX. So,
hello everyone, good morning.
hi, and if we get Jimmy Sanford, which we do, we have a full house for the core engineering team. Hi, Jimmy.
Believe it or not, I guess.
Believe it or not, he's walking on air. I never thought I would share my screen. All right, can we see it? Fantastic. So at Grooming, we are very explicitly not assigning stories. You can feel free to be interested in a story and to declare your interest, but we don't do the assignment directly. You can feel free to self-assign afterwards. What we're doing here is identifying stories that need to be sized and to have extra detail added and to be prioritized in the backlog. Hello, Bargreen.
Hey, what's up?
How you doing? We have superstars Bargreen Ellingson. My video's a bit blocked, but I think I see Paul. And is Jonathan in there? Or is that Cooper?
Cooper.
Hey, Cooper. So
Hi there.
again, can everyone see my screen?
Yep. Yes.
Okay, so you can see that in ZenHub, which again you all have access to, and if anyone has trouble getting access to ZenHub, please ask us in the relevant community channels. You can see that we have a for grooming section, and we're going to go through it in priority order. So let's start here. Fallback when JavaScript is unavailable. Okay, folks. PWA Studio and Venia are completely JavaScript-powered applications. So there is almost no data display when JavaScript is disabled. Let's kind of talk first about the acceptance criteria and where this story came from. Now, Eric opened it, but it came originally from a request or a bit of interest from, I believe, from community. Am I wrong? Or does somebody on this call feel that they brought this issue up originally? No? Well, most websites do need to have a JavaScript fallback. I think this is an unusual case because progressive web apps are largely implemented with their progressive loading in JavaScript. So what this really, I think, is it's a proxy for discussing server-side render. And we have a server-side render now, though it is partial. And it uses, at least right now, a different methodology, a different template language and rendering system than the front end does. That is to say, the application is not currently isomorphic or universal. So the thing that happens right now, if JavaScript is disabled on the browser, is a completely blank screen. And that's because there's nothing that gets rendered into the body and there's no style that is added. I don't think it's realistic, personally, for us to add very much functionality with disabled JavaScript. And the single reason for that is that without JavaScript, the way that you interact and send data back and forth in the way that an e-commerce store would require is by using regular HTTP form posting. And that would require that we implement an entirely separate tier of logic to handle those form posts, because Magento itself is not appropriate for this because Magento adds its own cross-site request forgery tokens, and it's not set up to accept form posts from non-Magento UIs. So putting Magento itself aside, I don't think that there is a place where we could implement a complete copy of the store's functionality. So this needs to be a fallback. And the basic feedback aspect of this description, I think, suggests that all that we need to do is display in a readable way and in a way that is ideally branded. We need to display information to the user that JavaScript is required for the site. Yeah. I'd say that is requires a combination of things. First, it requires that the display that occurs be completely server rendered, which we know. It requires that the display be invisible or not rendered. We don't want a flash of unbehaviored content when JavaScript is enabled. And ideally, we want the display to be as branded as possible.
So I have a screen.
That's where I was going to go next. Samia.
Yeah, I have a screen. I guess the message that I have is a bit more generic that says, sorry, we couldn't find the page that you requested.
Okay.
Does it need to be something different and specific to JavaScript not being enabled?
Well, yeah, I mean, there are ways to detect that JavaScript is not enabled.
Okay.
And so that we would need a more appropriate message than that. But the basic treatment, I think we can look at to talk about what will be necessary to embed as style.
So I'll just update the issue with a screenshot, and we can talk about it.
Okay, I mean, you could share your screen too. I can stop sharing, you can go. But
That's, I mean, I think it would be easier for you to just...
all right, you'll update the issue and I'll refresh the issue.
I've already added a comment.
Have you? All right, I'm refreshing. Okay, oh, look at that. Hey, oh, that's lovely. So what we have here is, first of all, the header, and though it may not at all be functional and none of those buttons do anything, it still adheres to the style.
And we can, so that was another question I had, is
Mhm.
if we're unable to load that header, what I can do is just add the venue logo on top of the close sign and just call it a day and have it be a completely blank page.
You know, that may be the quickest. That may be the quickest route, but we can talk about it in a little bit more detail. I think
Yeah, we can.
given our time crunch, I think that's almost definitely what we'll do. But
I
I
can
want to
update it.
take the opportunity to talk about these sorts of stories. So
Sure thing, and we can discuss that. Yeah.
So before sizing, I will say briefly that we have work in progress to actually deliver critical CSS on the server side, extracted from all the CSS, bundled, and injected into the application shell. It's dependent right now on Webpack 4, which is an ongoing project which we've put aside in order to achieve just the final scenarios. So if anyone wants to, we can look at I'm not going to try to demo it, but we have a branch, I believe down here somewhere. We have a critical CSS by file name branch where I've implemented a basic notion that the developer manually selects what about their component that they have developed is considered to be critical. For instance, page component, sort of the outer bit of the UI, so if you're going to render anything even basic, you probably want part of it to be critical. So I just separated the critical CSS, and the mask CSS seemed less critical. So in page, we obviously import the file differently. And the reason that we name these files this way is that in this branch, we have added a plugin in our Webpack tools to do, oh, have we not? Wrong branch. We'll just go to the whole Webpack 4 refactor. We have a critical CSS plugin, and that plugin actually injects a loader that adds a regular expression detector, a test, so that when the file name ends with critical, that it processes it with an extractor instead. That produces a file called critical CSS, and then the rest of the workflow is to The rest of the workflow involves the Venia YML file, which is mysteriously absent because I'm still in the wrong branch. The Venia upward file then has a critical CSS file that it pulls out of an asset manifest that is generated. And then when it renders this application shell template, it actually pulls in the contents of that file and shoves them into a style tag at the top. Excuse me. And so then you actually have a style tag that injects the critical CSS that is put together just from those file names. The reason I show this off is not because I want you to use this technique. It's not even merged, not even vetted or code reviewed. What I want to make sure is that we don't take extra time in this story to come up with our own critical CSS technique. You may have one that is superior, which would be fine, but we should discuss that separately. I don't think this is the story to start experimenting with that because we have outstanding work for it. So with that in mind, Salmia, if you want to do a version of this comp that doesn't have the header.
It's already done. I'm uploading it.
Salmia literally did it during grooming. Then that means that we can size this story as though all you're doing is, again, according to the acceptance criteria, you are displaying the branded page and the appropriate message if JavaScript is disabled. You are not displaying, even for a millisecond, that page if JavaScript is enabled, and you have this thing rendered on the server side so that it is, well, obviously you have to, so that it's JavaScript. So I guess we're down to the two acceptance criteria apart from what's written up here that Google Lighthouse needs to parse it. So I would say that part of the acceptance criteria for the story is that we run the deployed pull request through Google Lighthouse and make sure that that box is checked. Does anyone have any questions about the scope and nature of this story now that we've gone through that?
You can have a look.
Oh, okay. I will do so. Hey, there we go. So here we have what I would say could just be a single image, probably. Yeah. Or, I mean, obviously not the whole image rasterized. We'd want text. But I think continue shopping is not right, considering you can't.
Oh, that was my other question. Sorry, I forgot to ask this on the previous iteration. Is that can we if they click that, can we just take them to Venue Home so that there's a way for them to recover without hitting the back button, maybe?
So again, this story is not about 404 page.
Okay.
Right.
Sorry, I think I'm a little bit confused
No
because
problem.
Eric said the same one would be used in the text. So would we do
I
a
see.
version of this that had no call to action at all and it just says you cannot find the page requested?
Actually, what I think Eric meant to say
Okay.
was that we would use the same like visual design
Gotcha.
and change only the content and call to action.
I see.
In this case, the content would say, instead of "sorry, we could not find the page you requested," it would say, "this site requires JavaScript to be enabled." And the call to action wouldn't be a button because you must do this manually, but then there'd be another paragraph of text or another sentence that said, please enable JavaScript in your browser.
Okay, so maybe let's, after grooming, if you have a couple of minutes, I'll just note that down and make sure that I upload the right thing.
Yeah, sure.
Don't want to do it on.
But we're an agile team, so don't feel blocked by that, because what Sami has provided is clearly suitable for a developer to start work on something like this. So do we have kind of some comfort now on?
Yeah,
on that?
And what I can do is I can upload the image for the Venia and close sign.
Yeah.
And I'll just put it in the issue right now so that
Great.
they have a placeholder.
Now you don't have to take a screenshot of the GitHub issue, which is nice. I've done that before.
Yeah. Just ask me.
Yes,
You're
just
like,
ask for
yeah.
the high resolution thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so does anyone on the call have any other questions about that? Okay, you know what it's time for? It's time for size. And that means Fibonacci. Anyone who is there anyone on the call who has not yet sized something with us or is not familiar with this process? Raise your hand or just say words.
Raising of hands.
I haven't sized anything, but
Okay.
I'll leave it to you guys.
Understood. So we size this according to the general concept of planning poker, where you consider you only use the numbers that are available on this screen, so you don't have too much granularity. They're arranged as Fibonacci's, except we're missing 2, so never mind. And the idea is that a size of 1 is something that a developer could complete in a day or less. Size of 3 is something that would take less than a full sprint. A size of 5 is something that would take, a size of 3 is something that would take less than half of a sprint. A size of 5 is something that would take half of a sprint or more. A size of 8 is a full sprint, and a size of 13 is too large. And it would mean that we have to break open the story into smaller pieces. Or if you say, it's a 13 and I can take it, we'll talk offline. So with that in mind, now that we have what we need for this story, does anyone want to volunteer a size estimate?
Yeah, I'll start. I think it's 5.
I think it's a 5? Okay. We got 5 from Mr. Sanford. Anyone else?
I'm going to second that just because of the discovery on this too.
Okay. Meaning, like, where do you do this rendering and how do you figure out how to not flash it and et cetera?
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
the key part.
Okay. Well, with 2 5s, and I was going to guess lower, but you guys have me second guessing myself, so I will agree that it is a 5. So let's size it that way. Given that sizing, we should do what I meant to do earlier, which is we should add a little bit of description.
Yeah, if you're going to edit the description, you should put in there something about, making sure this kind of thing is has got at least a few tests written for it.
Okay. Message displays when JavaScript is disabled only using server-side render. Message never displays when JavaScript is enabled. Message includes minimal Venia branding. the mockup and informs user that site requires JavaScript.
Do you want to put anything about that button in the acceptance criteria?
Don't have a button?
I'm literally
Or-
going to update the image in 5 minutes if
Okay.
necessary.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
just refresh the page on.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah, okay. So, I mean, the site requires JavaScript.
Because maybe they enable JavaScript and then they want to like just refresh the page. and see
Sure,
if
that's
it
a very
makes
good
sense.
point. Okay, let's see then. There's assumptions, tasks. Okay, let's say example message for review. This site requires JavaScript. We could say the site, the store, or even Venia. The Venia store requires JavaScript to be enabled in your browser. To shop, please enable JavaScript in your browser and refresh this page. That is not the final thing. It's just an example to get started. Any objections?
Maybe something less Vania specific, but it's fine.
So my thought is that we would like to be able to have enough logic in there so that it's not fully generic, so that you could inject the name of the store.
Okay.
But that's not an acceptance criterion. It's just an example.
Perfect. Yeah. That makes sense.
So the message includes minimal if any of branding, and then test exists. Yeah, add test for display using get on gone. Rowan. Add test for display using headless browser, probably. Okay. We can adjust these tasks. I would say discovery, implement, verify, implement across the storefront testing and documentation. These tasks look good. Does anyone have any suggestion for additional tasks?
You want to make a note about anything that you said about not redefining critical path, the way critical path CSS is rendered?
Yeah, I would say that we can put that in assumptions. Critical path CSS is not necessary or advised for this story. Only branding is image. How's that? Okay. Do we consider this groomed? Footloose, fancy free. Let's go. All right. Thank you, everybody. So we also have for grooming a forgot password implementation. And this one I think we should talk about in a little bit more detail. So let's see. Tima, you're on the phone, and Bargreen, you guys are on the phone. You have, and we have talked about this to some length, right? Like this is already sort of partly fairly groomed. But it still sort of needs to be sized, and it needs to be understood as to the acceptance criteria. So let's first of all start by asking Salmia whether what you're seeing here, I mean, are you watching the shared screen? I know you're doing other stuff, so.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
watching.
Okay, cool. Do you, looking at these mock-ups, think that they're still current?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So a couple of things worth mentioning is that the REST API does support this interaction, though there may be some necessary additions to the REST API's functionality. You may have to add a header. That's something that you can discover with our cool new redoc, REST API documentation. And this story appears to be blocked by my account so that the create an account call to action can click through. So I would say don't wait, just make the button do nothing and then wire it up when we're ready, right? Exactly. So this is a sign-in page, and the story is just to implement the forgot password workflow. So
So when they click, so this is actually, it's linked up in the prototype.
Mm-hmm.
They'd click, forgot username or password, and there have been some, I'll update the screenshots, there have been some minor changes to this, as I was saying yesterday.
Okay.
So if you could scroll back up again
Sure.
a little bit. Yeah, so then they're taken to the screen where they enter their email.
Mm-hmm.
A screen follows that says, if we have your email or if an email is associated with this account, you
Yeah.
receive a password reset link.
Yes.
And then once they do that, that's when we have to address A, opening in the same browser versus B, opening in a different browser.
Oh,
the
yeah.
email.
Okay. Yeah.
Because if they did open in the same one, we could potentially say continue shopping and plot them on the homepage of Venya. But if they didn't, if it opened in Safari for whatever reason and they started out in Chrome, like you were telling me, there would be no way to recover from that other than if we could just provide a button that said go to Venya home.
So I think a lot of that is system dependent. A lot of that's operating system dependent. Like, so consider first of all that for our acceptance criteria, we're almost always focusing on the mobile use case, wherein it's fairly rare that somebody would accidentally switch browsers. I know personally that there's a risk of doing it when I am in Gmail and it always forgets that I want to use Safari every time anything happens, and it says, if you want to open this in Chrome, hey, I don't know, I mean, it's just like Safari with different branding, which is true on iOS. But so that is something to consider, but I think that it's hard for us to address it. It's hard for us in our own code and our own implementation to address the use case.
Okay.
What I would prefer, I think, just in terms of ordering, is to do this story under the assumption that the browser to email connection is constant, and then address bugs as they occur.
Okay.
Is that acceptable to you, or does that feel like it's too risky?
Sure.
Well, I mean, you got a phone too. Like, how often do you end up in a workflow where you switch browsers?
I think that your approach is right. Like, I mean, address the common case, right, which is what we can very safely assume is they're not switching the browser, and then
Gotcha.
address the exception.
Gotcha.
I don't know if I completely agree that that's a common use case, but I think it's good to go with the easiest to address and assume they would be in the same browser, and then because I can't say for certainty how often the split, it happens with me very often, but that's because I use Chrome on my phone. But that I would need to have a little bit better idea about what the 80-20 is. If it's a 50-50 even split, then it becomes a bit more critical to address it than if it isn't. But yeah, I'm fine going with this assumption.
Okay. Implement a forgot password workflow starting from the sign-in page, which displays user ID form and the submit button, and then informs the user that if the account is valid, or if the account exists, they will receive an email to reset their password. And I think I should emphasize that the email in this story is out of scope. Magento sends that email, and upon calling the REST API endpoint, and there will be a later story for how PWA implementations might also customize emails. Okay, so just to be clear, the only thing that this story is about is getting to that form, getting the API call made so that the email is sent.
Sorry, everybody. I have another stand-up I have to run to.
Sure. Thank you,
So
Igor.
I'm gonna show it.
Sure.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you, man. Okay, so I think the assumptions again that my account experiences Venia or my account button is a dummy button today, and then access to basic mail service to reset password. I think is that Magento backend performs the actual email creation and sending. Okay. And now for the tasks, implement the forgot password screen with instructions emailed submit. Hook up action creators, reducers, and code which calls relevant REST API endpoints, testing and documentation. Okay. Does anyone have questions about what we've got here?
The actual password reset not included in the scope of this?
Yeah, the password reset, just like sending the email, is actually conducted by Magento and backend. And thank you, actually, I should make that clearer. As a shopper, I want to reset my password for Venia. As a shopper who forgot my password, I want to reset my password for Venia so that I can access previous orders purchased using my information on file. The backend password reset logic and the sending of the email in this story are out of scope. The Venia app should call the API endpoint for resetting password, and Magento performs the reset and sends the email. There will be a later story for how PWA implementations might customize emails. Is that clear? Awesome. Yeah, this is just a UI story wired up to an API endpoint. Okay. Further questions, or shall we get to the sizing?
Looks good to me.
I forgot that I have to apply labels now to sizes, so I'm going to anyway. All right. So, what do we think? Since Jimmy went first last time, I'm going to make whoever I can see on the screen right now go first. I'm looking at the screen, and it is, well, Bargreen, you're sharing your screen, so you played yourself.
We think it's a 3.
Okay. We got a 3. We got a 3 on the board. Anyone else?
I thought higher.
Okay. Well, higher than 3 is 5. Is that what you think?
I think it's at least, yeah. If you're saying it'll take someone most of a sprint to knock it out, I think so, yeah. It's got JS work, it's got CSS work, it's got forms with custom kind of messaging there, so
Yeah, and then it's got...
I think it'll take more than a couple days.
Okay. Bargreen, do you think that you want to defend your 3, or do you want to lift it to 5?
No, we'll not defend the 3.
Okay. I tend to agree. I think that stories like this should be 3s. I would love to have enough componentry and enough like logic best practices available for this one to be straightforward, but I think that we're still on the way. So we'll call that a 5 as well. It's groomed. We good?
Yep.
We good. Okay. So, over here. All right, now here we have a documentation story. Now, typically, those don't go through the grooming process
Right.
the same way, but they're labeled for grooming. So,
I mean, my hope for opening up documentation for public grooming is just to get the community's opinions or any questions that I can add to this issue that I can address in the topic. Just basically just to get feedback.
Excellent. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
So, this issue does not mean that we're grooming it for you going and learning Jekyll and adding it to the PWA DevDocs repository. Exactly. Yeah. That's Mr. Kalkoven's job. But we are grooming this story ultimately for execution almost likely definitely by him.
Yeah.
And in doing so, we've got to add some detail if necessary. Like I myself feel like we need to consolidate our documentation. In general, we've got a different story for that. But the explanation of it's no longer a theme is something that I want to make sure that we have like a deprecation plan and a removal plan for it. Because we want to get everyone off the idea, right? I mean, it's going to persist, is this a theme? But I think to avert confusion, we should probably like upfront say that it was a theme and now it's not.
Right.
And then later we should change that.
And there's going to be questions from Magento developers coming in. It's like, is this a theme? How's it different from theme development?
Gotcha.
So this topic would help clear that.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So we have these topic suggestions, comparing and contrasting theme development and PWA storefront developments, doing a pros and cons list, describing the kind of overall idea of modularity and composing your storefront UI versus choosing a base theme and then performing extensions or modifications on that, performing extensions or modifications on that single large dependency. We don't want to do that. I think that's very important to describe because we get a lot of, I think, confusion from folks who are accustomed to that being the Magento way that you reuse code.
Right.
Compare and contrast how theme updates work. That's really good. List of skills needed for either approach. That's really good. And I think what I might add here would be dependency management.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because like in the Magento world, dependency management is done one way. There's like a combination of approaches. There's Composer, but then also in your theme XML, you declare a dependency, and then at runtime, Magento will search for it and then yell at you if it can't find that theme installed. So yeah, let's maybe just add that.
Is there anyone else in the community who would like to add something for this topic?
And
silence is agreed.
versus in Magento themes using Composer and PHP file resolution. All right. Crickets, and you don't have to size it right now. This is more appropriate for people to ask for more clarity or say, this is what I would love in docs.
Yep.
Sounds like you guys think this is already fairly thorough and relevant, which what I've come to expect. So I'm gonna, do you want to size it or do you want me to leave it to be sized?
It'll probably be a 3.
Okay, we'll call it 3. All right. Done. There's a couple other documentation topics that I think we can address briefly.
Just 1 second, Zach.
Oh, sure.
Going back to the JavaScript one.
Okay.
Jordan says you might want to show contact info from the merchant there. I want to understand if by contact information he means a support email.
Well, Jordan's on the line.
Yeah, I chatted him, but I don't think he's seen it, so I just wanted to bring it up to make sure I understood what he was saying.
Jordan, do you feel comfortable just turning on the mic and talking about that?
Oh, his mic isn't working.
Oh, okay. Well, no problem. It's a good point. I think that relates to the message to be sent, and I think it's actually a very, very good idea, and it's either a support email or support phone number. Probably, I think it's something we could leave up to the implementer of the theme. The merchant and the theme implementer will probably be interacting.
I just kind of want to understand the context around which this would happen, right? I mean, from what I understand from discussing this with Jimmy a little earlier is that it's not likely that somebody would purposefully have their JavaScript disabled, especially not someone who's a shopper. So if they do hit this accidentally, they're not a technical user. And by asking them to send a support email, we're potentially having them abandon the shopping journey. Instead, he showed me an example from SoundCloud, which just has a link that says, find out how to enable it, and it just takes you to a quick tutorial on how to do it easily in your browser.
Is the tutorial written and maintained by SoundCloud?
No, I think it's just enable
It's
JavaScript.
literally enable-javascript.com.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, that's interesting.
So if SoundCloud is going with that approach, and most of their users are probably artists or somebody potentially less technical,
Yeah.
I feel like that's at least a continuum for them to say, okay, I'll quickly fix this and continue shopping, as opposed to if you force them to send. First of all, people won't send a support email; they'll just churn at that point. They won't continue shopping.
No, you're absolutely right.
That's why I'm hesitant to do that.
So, okay, so what I think is interesting about this is that I have never thought along those lines before about the idea that somebody would have JavaScript disabled and not know, and that's, I think, a terrible oversight on my part. Now, it's just coming from a world where like people don't even like using graphical user interfaces. I sometimes see people saying, I disable JavaScript. It's terrible. It's the worst. The web should be, static. So my picture of the persona of someone who has JavaScript disabled is someone who means to.
Exactly.
And who you would have to persuade, like, hey, we know what we're doing. You can enable JavaScript on our site. So that's totally different from the use case you guys are describing, and I think yours sounds much more likely.
Yeah, because if they did have it deliberately disabled, they would know how to.
Yeah. Like if you're a store selling like Arduino and like transistors and stuff, then yeah, you might get a guy who's got it disabled. But this is Venia. So I think adding a link to enable JavaScript is a really good idea.
Yeah, and I think that keeps it generic enough. It's more sort of a sampler for the type of message you can include when somebody runs into that, and it's up to the merchant based on the audience that they have to make that more or less technical as they feel suits their audience. But I think for Venia, keeping it relatively simple is probably a good idea. Okay.
So as the original suggester of the issue, Jordan, your mic is not working, but you're talking to Salmi. Are you talking on Slack or?
No, he's chatting on the Blue Jeans.
In the Blue Jeans chat.
Or
Okay.
the Blue Jeans chat.
The good old BJC.
And I've updated the screenshot, Zetlin, if you wanted to quickly scroll down and look at it.
Gotcha. I see a screenshot here. I will.
Your screen is frozen.
Is it?
No, I can see it.
I updated the thing in the issue. You can look at it if you want.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But can you see I looked at Jimmy's example of SoundCloud. Are we all seeing that? Okay.
Yeah.
SoundCloud. You know they're the greenest tech company in the world.
Really?
Yeah. So that's a good suggestion, and if Jordan's all right with it, I think I'll just add. Consider adding a link to enable JavaScript. Actually, why don't I just put that in the example?
It's actually in the markup, so.
Okay.
Yeah, if you would just scroll down really quick.
Oh, you put it in there.
Yes.
Hey, that's great. Okay. Actually, I'm gonna. Well. Oops. JavaScript is disabled. It's just for clarity's sake. To shop or to continue shopping? Continue using the Venia store. Okay. There we go. Great suggestion. And there we go. Okay, we got a couple other documentation topics, and again, I want to open the floor for people to ask for more, but some of this is just chores, like move Venia sample data into its own topic.
Yeah.
We probably don't
And that
need...
was just to streamline the setup since it's an optional step now. People don't need to set up
Okay.
Magento locally, so they don't need to install.
Okay, so we probably don't need commentary on that.
Probably not,
It's
unless
more of
people want to add something to this installation topic.
Okay. Yeah,
So,
I just realized I need to get rid of these. For groomings, we are always slightly changing this process to make it more maintainable and easier and discoverable, so whoopsie daisy. So yeah, I'll go ahead and just move that one over and say that it doesn't have to be groomed. You're going to size it, right?
yeah, it's already sized.
Oh, the yards. Oh, yeah, so it is. Okay, yeah, that's a 1. And then 1, 2. Okay. Update tools and libraries topic.
And this one is just to keep the content fresh. I know we've introduced a few more libraries when this was initially created.
Yeah.
Probably adds more details on GraphQL. We're using Apollo, and that's set.
Yeah.
So, and then some of the React libraries like React Router. That would be good to include. Basically, my vision for this page is just a study guide checklist for incoming developers to see if they have the knowledge to work with our tools. So,
I would suggest that you split the topic into subsections, like subsections or branched guides for core framework developers and contributors to Peregrine build pack and or like Venia core, and then also front end developers making storefronts who want to consume those modules. And then I would also add for backend and DevOps and sysadmin roles who want to know how Magento PWAs are deployed and maintained in production. So, I mean, there are different areas of need for each one, so it's probably a good, I would say that's a good split.
Yeah.
Any other suggestions? I'm sorry.
Oh, not for me.
Okay. Because like in, core framework developers do need to know like what React Router does, how it does it. They need to know like what our asynchronous logic addition concept is, how we are adding slices, how we are adding action implementations slowly as you progress through the store. Those are fairly advanced concepts. Front-end developers making storefronts, ideally they would just be able to use the cool modules that we provide. Oh, the route handler, you just drop it in. Or a link, you just drop it in. And even upward, maybe they should be able to just adjust that by adding a route, as we've seen people do at EPAM. But then the sysadmin just needs to know, do I use PM2 or what? Mm-hmm. I've been answering those questions offline. So I think that's a reasonable division. Yeah?
Yep.
All right.
Does increase my estimate to probably like 5.
Oh, really?
I mean, how complicated are you thinking of these sub things? Is because I was thinking this is just an update to a single topic, but
understood.
Splitting these into different.
Understood. So what you can consult with me, like make it 3. You can consult with me and just say like, instead of having like a huge guide for all 3 of those folks, just be like, if you are core framework developer, these are the things you should probably know. If you're just doing development on Venia, these are the things you should probably know. If you're doing sysadmin, just like...
So just split that topic into 3 large...
Yeah, we're like... Exactly.
Okay, then that 3.
3?
Is fine.
Okay. I love adding work to people. And we are almost at time. So... let's do make optimized images available in Vacuum Magento store. So this is an interesting one. Those of you who have loaded and run PWA Studio, even in build mode, might have observed that each image averages 300 kilobytes. Has anyone observed this or commented on it or had a prospective solution in their minds to it? The floor is open for comment. This is a big deal. Thank you. I hate when the floor is open for comment like this, and there's just
Yeah, it's the worst.
I'm like a wedding DJ looking at an empty parquet floor. All right, so
Well, you got to play bangers only.
bangers. I'm sorry, not everything I have is a banger. That's boring. The idea behind Magento image management in core, call it legacy Magento, is that the images themselves are an asset to be used in multiple contexts. Like they could be resized, they could be printed, whatever. So most sample data and most stores with actual image data are going to upload images in a really large format, maybe for Zoom apps or whatever, because Magento automatically resizes and optimizes those images when you are using a Magento render UI, when you are using the Magento block to use a PHP call to insert an image URL. What it does at that time is it calls a controller that produces a unique cached URL for a particular version of an image. Conveniently, that is completely unavailable in the API service. And I think that given the conversations we've had, and I'll link a couple of issues in this, given the conversations we've had with backend and with ops and with strategy, they're probably not going to add it to the API because that adds a layer of responsibility to the API that, you can make an argument that it's not really for. Like GraphQL is for getting the data, not for aiding you in doing view display. So if we were to say, like, get me an image and then put an argument in the image in GraphQL for it to optimize it, that would be nice. And that would be a great technical solution. But if it's coming, it's not coming for a while because they're still figuring out scope. So let's just say we cannot rely on the Magento backend to optimize these images before 2.3.0 or even in the immediate future. Instead, we have two choices. We either accept that these images, which are 90% of the payload of our site and destroy our Lighthouse score, we accept that they're large and move forward, or we come up with a way to optimize them properly. And I don't think it's acceptable to optimize the existing sample data images and just save them statically, because then in a demo situation, if you add a new product and add a new image to that product, it's potentially still terrible. So we really want this to actually optimize images programmatically. And I have an idea for how to do it, but I would welcome suggestions as to what you think could be done or how it could be done. Well, we kind of have these options that we suggested, and I think escalating with the API teams is potentially possible to say, please do it, but I don't know if that's going to happen. My thinking is that we would write a middleware with Upward. That is to say that we add a concept to Upward of transforming binary streams. Now, Paul, you observed recently, and I don't know if that issue has received enough attention, but you observed recently that Upward's kind of bad at streaming even like the favicon, and that's because I deliberately designed Upward when I sort of came up with the idea is that, this just manipulates text. It's like Unix streams, we don't have to think about any of that. But that's becoming clear that that's not really sufficient. I think there's two extra things we need to add. One is that it should be able to manipulate hydrated objects as long as they can be serialized like JSON, and that it should be possible to deal with binary data intelligently. So we need to add these concepts to Upward, and although I think it's most likely, given the relative youth of that code base and the youth of Upward as an idea, it's likely that I'll end up doing it. But nevertheless, this is a story, and it is groomable, and I would love it for someday soon people to write their own implementations of Upward or suggestions for extension to the spec. So I would welcome questions from people attending this on what you would need to participate more in the development of and the roadmap for Upward. Would anyone be interested in trying this story, or does that seem like not today and not for the foreseeable future?
do we have an issue that documents the problems you were talking about just now with the hydrated objects and binary data?
Yeah, Paul, you opened that issue, right?
Yes, I did. I did open that issue, and I had a weird fix for it, probably.
Yeah, I know. Well, I remember. Well, actually, I don't remember now.
Yeah, I mean, if we have a good issue here, then I think
Yeah.
that's usually 90% of what you need to get going, to start investigating this kind of stuff. But
Yeah. It's all broke. So yeah, the Express middleware sees that it has a content type of image PNG, but because it's not serving a literal file, I think Express gets cocky and adds charset UCF8. And Paul's suggestion is to change the actual data type that we send to Express, and that's an implementation change in Upward.js. I actually think that is exactly what to do. We would just need to, again, thread the logic of the three types of data we can deal with, JSON, text, and binary, and maybe make sure that at the moment that we send it, that we do the appropriate buffer encoding. Because this is totally a good fix. But this doesn't answer the overall question of how Upward would optimize images. It's just, I think, some good context. Let's go ahead and say, related to 408, Upward needs to gain the concepts of binary data streams. Actually, I'd say blobs because I don't want to stream it. Binary data blobs, structured JSON, and structured JSON as data to manipulate, as well as plain UTF-8 text. Okay, so at least now we've got...
Does the solution for this particular story have to be aware of or take into account any existing feature of Magento today that it does around image optimizing, or is this a different kind of optimization?
I think the answer is no right now. That's something we can iterate on. I think if a business user emerges to say, like, well, Magento optimizes this way and that's what I need, then we can cover that. For now, I think just there's a sanity aspect to this where we don't do any resizing. It's just these images can stay the same size and shrink like 75%. And that's what we would do. I would just add, the Express middleware for libvips and then have Upward thread through it.
Okay.
So sizing, I know this is tough for everyone. I would definitely size, I meant to do this week and got interrupted, but I would definitely size this as a 5. And the only reason that it's not larger is, again, because I suspect that I'll be the one doing it. But yeah, I would say this is a 5, just considering both the tasks have to include, which I'll add.
Okay.
The chosen solution to write middleware within Upward and tasks, add binary and JSON data handling to Upward file and
I think somebody's waiting.
data spec.
We're at time.
Yeah, we're at time. Okay. So I'm just finishing this up right now. Add resolvers for transformation. Add image compression to strategies and implement in Upward.js. There we go. Done. Sized. Okay, we're done with the room. People are waiting. We don't want to be rude, but I want to open the floor quickly for any questions or major concerns that people have in terms of grooming, sizing, or what's in the backlog. And I closed and reopened the issue. No? Okay.
Looks good to me.
Great. Thank you, everyone, very much for your attendance, and we will see you at demo on Monday.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
All right.
Have a good
Thank
weekend.
you. Bye bye.
Bye.